Somewhere in a Microsoft lab, a chip smaller than a fingernail just got switched on. It is tiny, it is quiet, and almost nobody outside a small circle of physicists has heard its name yet. But according to verified reports, this chip is already being described as a direct threat. It threatens the cryptography protecting hundreds of billions of dollars in Bitcoin alone. That single sentence alone should explain why people far outside the world of physics are suddenly paying attention. They call it Majorana 2, and the irony here is brutal. The same company racing to build it is also warning the world to prepare for the danger it represents. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe right now. This story is not about some distant future. According to Microsoft itself, this chip is already here, sitting in a lab today. It is quietly ticking closer to a deadline nobody can predict with certainty. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why a chip with only 12 working qubits has the financial world this nervous. You will also understand why some of the world's top physicists think the entire announcement might be built on shaky ground. To understand why this tiny piece of hardware matters so much, start with the basics. You first need to understand what makes it fundamentally different from any chip in your home. Ordinary computers run on bits, and a bit can only be a 0 or a 1. There is no in between, no exceptions, no gray area at all. Every email, every bank transfer, every video you have streamed eventually reduces two long strings of these zeros and ones. Quantum computers break that rule entirely because they use something called qubits instead of bits. A qubit can exist as a 0, a 1, or a strange mixture of both at once. This sounds like science fiction, but it is real, peer-reviewed physics. It has been studied for decades by some of the smartest people on the planet. The problem has never been understanding the theory. The problem has always been building a qubit stable enough to actually use. Hundreds of research teams around the world have spent decades and billions of dollars chasing exactly this single goal. Most qubits are extremely fragile, falling apart from the smallest vibration. A tiny shift in room temperature can be enough to ruin everything. Scientists have compared a normal qubit to a snowflake, beautiful in theory but destroyed by the slightest touch. Picture trying to balance a coin perfectly on its edge in the middle of a hurricane. That is essentially what engineers attempt every time. They try to hold a quantum state steady. A passing truck outside the lab, a tiny change in temperature, even stray cosmic radiation can collapse the state instantly. Physicists call this problem decoherence. For decades, it has been considered the single biggest obstacle in quantum computing. It stands between an interesting lab experiment and a true world-changing technology, whoever finally solves this problem at scale does not just win a science prize. They potentially unlock a tool more powerful than anything currently running on Earth. Entire national budgets, entire corporate divisions, and entire scientific careers have been built around this single chase. This is exactly the problem Microsoft claims its new chip was built to solve. In June of 2026, at its annual Build Developer Conference, Microsoft unveiled Majorana 2. This conference is normally reserved for software updates, cloud tools, and AI announcements aimed at developers. Choosing this stage for a hardware physics breakthrough was itself a notable signal about how Microsoft views this announcement. The company says it is 1,000 times more reliable than its predecessor chip. That earlier chip was announced just over a year before this new one, according to verified statements from Microsoft. The new chip holds its delicate quantum state far longer than before. It now lasts an average of 20 seconds, with some measurements stretching as long as a full minute. That might sound unimpressive at first, but the earlier version of this chip could only hold its state for a few thin milliseconds before collapsing into noise. Like and subscribe right now, because a jump like that is enormous. If it holds up to outside scrutiny, it would represent one of the most important materials breakthroughs in computing history. Financial markets noticed immediately, with several quantum computing related stocks moving sharply in the hours following Microsoft's announcement. That kind of rapid market reaction shows just how closely investors are now tracking even incremental progress in this field. So what actually changed between the original chip and this new one? According to Microsoft's own engineering team, the secret lies in a single, almost reckless sounding material swap. The original Majorana 1 chip used aluminum as its superconducting material. The new Majorana 2 chip replaces that aluminum with lead instead. Microsoft technical fellow Chetan Nayak admitted in a press briefing that the idea initially sounded almost crazy. Engineers generally try hard to avoid putting lead into delicate electronic devices at all, but Microsoft says swapping in lead dramatically widens something called the topological gap. This gap is a kind of energy buffer that shields the fragile quantum state from outside interference. The company also redesigned the underlying semiconductor layer entirely. It now grows a combination of indium arsenide and indium arsenide antimonide on a gallium antimonide substrate. If that sentence sounded complicated, that is because it genuinely is. This is cutting edge. Materials science built one atomic layer at a time inside a tightly controlled laboratory. A single misplaced atom anywhere along these delicate boundaries could ruin the fragile quantum effects the entire chip depends on. That level of precision helps explain why this kind of breakthrough takes years rather than months to achieve. There is another twist here that almost nobody outside the tech press has noticed yet. According to Microsoft's own blog post announcing the breakthrough, artificial intelligence played a direct role in this discovery. The company says its Microsoft Discovery platform used agentic AI tools for the research. These tools analyzed decades of existing quantum research in a fraction of the usual time. These AI agents reportedly helped identify promising new materials for the chip. They also automated thousands of delicate measurements scientists previously had to run by hand. The sheer volume of data involved in this kind of research would normally take human teams months to fully process and interpret. Microsoft claims its AI tools compress that same workload down into a matter of days in several specific instances. The AI even uncovered subtle manufacturing flaws that had quietly limited qubit reliability for years. Microsoft Corporate Vice President Zulfia Lam described watching the AI system work in real time. He said it could run complex voltage adjustments in parallel, something human researchers simply cannot do. Human thinking, he explained, tends to move in a straight line rather than many directions at once. Microsoft also reportedly built a separate AI agent specifically to help its global research team manage information. This agent organizes, analyzes, and surfaces relevant findings from across the entire sprawling research program automatically, with researchers spread across multiple countries and scientific disciplines. Simply keeping track of new findings had become its own serious challenge. Like and subscribe immediately, because this means artificial intelligence did not just help write this story, it may have directly helped build the very chip making the story possible. Now here is where the real nightmare begins to take shape. It has almost nothing to do with science fiction robots or distant future warfare. It has everything to do with a 5-letter acronym most people have heard but few truly understand, called RSA encryption. Nearly all of modern digital security relies on one simple mathematical fact. Factoring extremely large prime numbers is mathematically brutal for ordinary computers to manage. Even the most powerful supercomputers on Earth would need thousands of years to crack a single properly sized key. That single mathematical assumption has quietly protected the modern world for over 4 decades now. It guards your bank account, your private messages, and your medical records. It also guards every single Bitcoin wallet currently sitting on the blockchain today. Think for a moment about how much of your daily life depends on this one mathematical assumption. Every time you check your bank balance, this same kind of encryption is silently working in the background. The same is true when you send a private message or log into a hospital patient portal online. Government communications, satellite, systems, and even software update signatures all lean on this same invisible wall. It is one of the most important pieces of infrastructure ever quietly built by human civilization. Almost nobody outside cybersecurity circles ever stops to think carefully about it. This is precisely where Bitcoin enters this story in a way that should genuinely concern people. According to research highlighted by industry analysts, an estimated $461 billion worth of Bitcoin sits exposed. Right now, these coins live in wallets with publicly exposed cryptographic keys, a sufficiently powerful quantum computer running an algorithm known as Shear's algorithm could theoretically forge digital signatures. Those forged signatures could unlock the wallets protecting those coins. One cryptography researcher explained the danger in painfully simple terms. Someone holding a working quantum computer could authorize a transaction draining every coin from your account. They could do this without your permission and without your knowledge. It is worth pausing here to understand exactly why Bitcoin specifically faces this particular kind of exposure. Many early Bitcoin wallets, including some believed to belong to the cryptocurrency's mysterious creator, used a method that publicly reveals their cryptographic key. Estimates suggest Satoshi Nakamoto's own holdings could total somewhere between 600,000 and 1.1 million coins. At current prices, that single stash alone would be worth tens of billions of dollars if it were ever moved. Because Bitcoin's underlying ledger is permanently public and unchangeable, any past transaction with an exposed key stays vulnerable forever. There is no way to quietly patch old transactions the way a company might patch a software bug. Some developers within the Bitcoin community have already proposed technical changes designed to address exactly this vulnerability. These proposals generally involve encouraging users to move funds into newer types of wallets that hide the public key until the moment of spending. Adoption of these safer wallet types has been slow so far, partly because most people simply do not realize the risk exists yet. This is precisely the kind of quiet, unglamorous infrastructure work that rarely makes headlines until something goes seriously wrong. That is not a hypothetical thriller plot anymore. Reports suggest this exact danger already has a chilling nickname inside cryptography circles. They call it Q-Day, the day a quantum computer finally breaks the locks holding digital trust together. Like and subscribe right now, because once you understand Q-Day, this tiny chip looks very different. Naturally, estimates for exactly when Q-Day might arrive vary wildly depending on who you ask. Researchers at Google have projected this moment could arrive sometime around 2032. That projection is based on their own internal modeling of quantum error rates over time. Other independent researchers studying the problem have suggested it could happen even sooner. Some believe it could potentially arrive by 2030 under aggressive but plausible assumptions. Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin has publicly weighed in on this exact debate. He believes there is roughly a 20% probability quantum computers break current cryptography by 2030. He has recommended blockchain networks aim to be fully prepared well before 2035, just to be safe. None of these estimates agree precisely on a date, and that gap matters. That uncertainty itself is part of what makes this threat so difficult to plan around. A study from the Federal Reserve has reportedly described this exact scenario as an active threat already in progress. That framing matters because it suggests financial regulators are not treating this as some distant theoretical risk anymore. Some analysts in the cryptocurrency industry have started calling certain test networks quantum canaries, borrowing the old phrase about coal mine warning birds. The idea is to battle test quantum resistant solutions safely without ever risking the actual main Bitcoin network in the process. Microsoft is far from the only company racing toward this particular finish line. That competitive pressure is part of why this story feels increasingly urgent right now. Google's own Willow chip has reportedly demonstrated big reductions in quantum error rates over the past year. Separately, researchers at Caltech made a striking and somewhat alarming claim of their own. They suggested that breaking a different encryption method, called elliptic curve cryptography, may need fewer quantum resources than once believed. Elliptic curve cryptography is actually the specific method Bitcoin uses to protect its digital signatures, making this particular finding especially relevant. If quantum computers can break this method using fewer resources than expected, the realistic Q-day timeline could end up shrinking rather than growing. Each of these announcements alone might seem like a small step forward in an obscure corner of physics, but taken together, they paint a picture of a technology accelerating faster than most conversations have caught up with. It also helps to look beyond Microsoft and Google alone, because this race has many more participants. IonQ, a company betting on trapped I don't technology, has reportedly been expanding its manufacturing capacity aggressively in recent months. The company's leadership has described its ambition in bold terms, comparing its own role to that of a chip giant in a completely different industry. IonQ recently moved to acquire a semiconductor manufacturing partner, specifically to accelerate its own production timelines further. Meanwhile, government priorities in the United States have placed quantum computing investment alongside artificial intelligence as a matter of explicit national security. That kind of high-level government attention rarely gets handed to a technology unless officials believe the stakes are genuinely serious. Smaller companies like Rigetti are also pursuing their own competing chip designs, adding even more pressure to an already crowded field. With so many well-funded competitors chasing the same prize, no single company can afford to fall noticeably behind for very long. Here is where the story takes its most unexpected turn, and it should genuinely surprise you. Despite all of this dramatic framing around encryption and a looming Q-day deadline, something important is missing. A significant number of credentialed physicists remain deeply skeptical that Majorana 2 actually does what Microsoft claims. According to verified reporting, University of Pittsburgh physicist Sergei Frolov has criticized the company for years now. Frolov stated bluntly that this latest preprint is not built on a solid scientific foundation. He went further, saying that mentioning Microsoft's quantum claims now tends to provoke chuckles among serious physicists. That is a remarkably blunt assessment coming from a credentialed expert inside the same field. Frolov has actually been involved in challenging Microsoft's claims for years now, not just with this latest announcement. He was one of the physicists who first flagged serious problems with an earlier, now retracted paper years before this newest chip existed. University of St. Andrews physicist Henry Legg has also raised similar concerns about Microsoft's more recent claims. Together, these critics represent a meaningful and persistent voice of caution inside the broader quantum physics community. Their objections are not simply dismissed by Microsoft either, since the company continues responding to specific technical criticisms in public. This skepticism is not simply academic jealousy or reflexive doubt, and it deserves a fair hearing, according to detailed technical analysis from independent quantum researchers. A real topological qubit needs two things. It requires two separate types of measurement, known among physicists as Z and X measurements. Reports suggest Microsoft's new Majorana 2 paper presents only the simpler Z-type measurement. It leaves out the second measurement that would more convincingly prove a genuine qubit exists. Without that second measurement, critics argue something important remains unproven. The chip may have only demonstrated a long-lived electrical state inside a wire, not a true functioning quantum bit. Microsoft's own paper reportedly acknowledges this exact gap directly in its text. It states that investigating these additional effects remains an important direction for future research. Critics describe this kind of careful, hedged language as scientifically responsible, even as the surrounding marketing language sounds far more confident and definitive. That is a notably cautious admission for a company that just announced a 1,000 times improvement at its biggest conference of the year. To understand why this missing measurement matters so much, it helps to think of it like a lock with two separate keyholes. The Z measurement essentially checks whether one specific keyhole is functioning correctly on its own. The X measurement checks whether both keyholes can work together correctly at the exact same time. Without testing both keyholes together, you cannot fully prove the lock actually works the way it is supposed to. Critics argue Microsoft has shown one working keyhole convincingly, while leaving the second, more important keyhole essentially untested in this announcement. To be fair, and accuracy matters enormously here, this skepticism has deep roots. This is not the first time Microsoft's quantum research has faced this exact kind of scrutiny. In 2021, the company was forced to retract a high-profile paper from the journal Nature. That retraction came after outside physicists challenged the underlying data behind the original claims. They demonstrated the data could just as easily be explained by ordinary material imperfections. It did not necessarily require any genuine topological quantum behavior at all. Independent physicists have raised remarkably similar concerns about nearly every major announcement since that retraction. The central scientific question, according to experts studying this field, is deceptively simple to state. Is Microsoft observing a real, exotic, topologically protected particle or something far more mundane? It could instead be observing an electrical effect that merely mimics the signature scientists hope to find. This exact same problem, scientists trying to tell a real signal from a convincing imitation, has haunted this entire research field for over a decade now. Multiple separate research groups around the world have reported similar promising signals over the years, only to later face the same kind of skeptical scrutiny, a theoretical particle this difficult to definitively prove tends to attract both genuine breakthroughs and false alarms in roughly equal measure that history alone explains. Why so many physicists now approach every new Microsoft announcement with a healthy dose of professional caution. Like and subscribe immediately, because the stakes of answering that question stretch far beyond one company. If Microsoft's devices genuinely host well-isolated Majorana particles with minute-scale stability, that changes everything. It would mark a true qualitative leap for the entire field of quantum computing. It would validate roughly 2 decades of sustained investment and engineering risk the company has taken. But if these devices turn out to be conventional, superconducting systems dressed up to look exotic, the consequences are serious too. The broader scientific community would need to seriously recalibrate its expectations going forward. Billions of dollars in investment, hiring, and national research priorities currently rest on this single open question. Microsoft has reportedly poured well over $1 billion combined into this specific research program over the past 2 decades. That level of sustained financial commitment, even amid persistent public skepticism, says something meaningful about the company's confidence. It also says something about how difficult it would be for Microsoft to simply walk away from this bet now. Abandoning this approach after 20 years of investment would represent an enormous, highly visible admission of strategic failure. That sunk cost reality is worth keeping in mind whenever you read Microsoft's confident public statements about this technology. It is worth stepping back to appreciate why Microsoft chose this difficult, contested path at all. Competitors like Google and IBM pursued a completely different qubit design, called Transmon qubits instead. Those chips already power devices with far higher qubit counts today than Microsoft's. Companies like IonQ bet instead on trapped I don't technology, a third entirely different physical approach. Microsoft made a deliberate decision years ago to walk a riskier, less proven road. The company bet that long-term stability would eventually outweigh short-term qubit counts. Right now, Majorana 2 holds only 12 qubits total, a genuinely tiny number. Rival chips from competing companies already operate with well over 100 qubits each. That gap matters less than it might first appear, according to Microsoft, because raw qubit count alone does not guarantee real computing power. A small number of genuinely stable, error-resistant qubits could theoretically outperform a much larger number of noisy, unreliable ones. Whether that trade-off actually favors Microsoft's approach remains, once again, a question only time and further testing can answer. Microsoft's own leadership has openly admitted what true commercial usefulness will require. The company says it will need roughly 1 million stable qubits eventually to reach that goal. That number, 1 million, deserves a moment of real perspective before moving forward. Today's most advanced quantum chips from any company combined still sit somewhere in the low thousands of qubits at most. Reaching 1 million would require a leap in scale roughly comparable to the entire history of computer chip miniaturization compressed into a single technology. Microsoft argues its topological approach scales more efficiently than rival designs, meaning fewer physical components are needed per stable, usable qubit. Whether that scaling advantage proves real in practice remains, once again, an open and genuinely contested question among experts. Microsoft itself has set a public target date of 2029 for delivering a scalable, useful quantum machine. Microsoft technical fellow Chetan Nayak has stated plainly that improvement every single year is required. He says the company must keep that steady pace to stay on track toward its ambitious roadmap. He pointed to this latest jump as concrete proof that exact kind of progress is happening. He framed the 1,000 times reliability improvement as evidence the underlying strategy is finally working. Whether outside physicists ultimately agree with that framing remains a genuinely open question. It is one that will likely take years of further peer-reviewed research to settle conclusively either way. None of this scientific uncertainty changes the very real policy response already happening worldwide. The United States National Security Agency has mandated quantum-safe encryption for new national security systems. The deadline for that mandate is January of 2027, a date now rapidly approaching, a complete migration across. All government infrastructure is required by 2035 under that same mandate. According to experts tracking this massive transition, it represents history's largest forced cryptographic overhaul. It touches nearly every secure website, encrypted bank transaction, and protected government channel operating today. Cybersecurity analysts keep warning about a specific strategy called Harvest Now, Decrypt Later. Under this strategy, adversaries quietly collect encrypted data today, intending to crack it open years from now. Diplomatic cables, defense contracts, and confidential corporate negotiations are all considered prime long-term targets for exactly this kind of patient collection effort. Intelligence agencies around the world are widely believed to already be stockpiling encrypted internet traffic for precisely this future purpose. Nobody can say with certainty how much of this stockpiling has already happened, since the entire activity is designed to remain invisible by nature. That invisibility is itself part of what makes this particular threat so unsettling for ordinary people to fully process. This threat is not limited to governments, banks, or wealthy Bitcoin holders sitting on fortunes. Ordinary people have personal information flowing through these exact same vulnerable systems every day. Medical records, tax filings, and private family photos stored in the cloud are all included. Security researchers have repeatedly pointed out something important about long-lasting data. Any data with a long, useful shelf life is already at meaningful risk under this exact strategy. That risk exists today, regardless of how secure your encryption might currently feel right now. Financial institutions and healthcare providers are required by law to retain records for decades. Both are considered among the most exposed industries of all to this exact future threat. That is exactly why many of them have already quietly begun migrating early, well ahead of any deadline. Cybersecurity professionals generally recommend one basic first step for any worried organization right now. They suggest conducting a complete internal audit of every system still relying on older standards like RSA. Once an organization fully understands exactly where its vulnerabilities sit, responsible planning becomes far easier. Some experts compare this entire process to the overhaul companies rushed through before the original Y2K scare. Back then, the deadline was known precisely, since the calendar itself told everyone exactly when midnight would arrive. This time, the deadline is hidden somewhere inside an active, accelerating scientific race with no fixed calendar date attached to it at all. The crucial difference here is that nobody actually knows the exact date this deadline will arrive. That uncertainty alone makes proactive planning significantly more difficult for any organization preparing seriously. It is worth remembering, amid all this talk of encryption and stolen Bitcoin, why this technology was pursued in the first place. Researchers have long argued a mature quantum computer could help design entirely new medicines by simulating molecules with precision no classical computer can manage. The same technology could theoretically model climate systems or optimize global supply chains in ways that meaningfully reduce both waste and cost. None of that civilian promise disappears just because the same technology also carries serious financial and security risks. Remembering that dual nature matters if you want a complete and balanced picture of why so many companies are chasing the exact same breakthrough. An entire global industry has quietly sprung up around this exact looming transition already. It remains almost invisible to most ordinary people, yet it is worth billions of dollars today. Specialized firms now build what is called post-quantum cryptography for exactly this purpose. These are new encryption methods specifically engineered to resist a future, fully matured quantum computer. Other companies have bet instead on something called quantum key distribution as their answer. This clever method uses quantum particle behavior itself to instantly detect any attempted interception. The simple act of observing a quantum particle changes its underlying state completely. That change immediately reveals the presence of an intruder trying to read the message. Major technology companies and several well-funded research spin-offs have already poured over $1 billion combined into winning this particular race. One spin-off company, originally born out of Google's parent organization, has reportedly raised over $1 billion on its own for exactly this mission. Other specialized firms focused purely on post-quantum cryptography have raised tens of millions of dollars in recent funding rounds. Some companies are racing to build quantum-safe products specifically for the financial sector, where the stakes of a security failure are especially severe. Others are targeting government contracts directly, betting that public sector spending will lead this particular transition before private industry fully catches up. Whoever ultimately wins this race for the dominant quantum safe standard could end up controlling a foundational piece of internet infrastructure for decades. So where does all of this genuinely leave us, sitting here in the middle of 2026? We are watching this story accelerate in something close to real time right now. Microsoft has unveiled a chip that could meaningfully reshape computing if its boldest claims hold up. At the very same time, a serious segment of the physics community remains entirely unconvinced by those claims. Meanwhile, governments, banks, and the entire cryptocurrency industry are racing in parallel to prepare. They are preparing for a deadline that nobody can currently predict with real confidence. This is not simply a story about one clever chip sitting quietly inside a distant research lab. It is a genuine collision between accelerating computer science and deep scientific uncertainty. It is also a collision with a financial system worth trillions that was never built to survive this threat. Keep an eye on a few very specific signals if you want to understand where this heads next. Watch closely for any independent laboratory successfully replicating Microsoft's measurement results on its own. Independent replication done by a lab with no financial stake in Microsoft's success would carry far more scientific weight than any internal company announcement. Watch for Microsoft eventually publishing the second type of measurement that skeptical physicists say is still missing, and watch closely for any further movement in formal Q-Day timeline estimates from major companies and researchers. Each of these threads, the chip itself, the scientific debate, and the shifting timelines are part of one story. Missing any single one of them means missing a meaningful piece of how this race ultimately gets decided. Like and subscribe right now if this story just changed how you think about a tiny chip nobody had heard of until today, and stay close, because whether Majorana 2 turns out to be Microsoft's crowning achievement or its most expensive scientific embarrassment, the answer matters enormously. It is going to directly shape how safe your digital life really is in the years ahead. You will absolutely want to be here when the world finally finds out which version of this story turns out to be true. Quantum computing might still sound like distant science fiction to most people scrolling through their phones today, but the decisions being made right now inside research labs and regulatory offices alike matter enormously. They will quietly shape how secure your money and your data really are for decades to come. Pay attention. Now, because by the time most people fully understand what just happened, the outcome will likely already be decided. The race is already underway, whether the average person watching this video realizes it or not. That is exactly why stories like this one genuinely deserve far more attention than they currently get from most mainstream news coverage today.